Okay. Wow, you guys have really sent in some interesting stuff this time around.
Yeah.
On the fat acceptance movement, I mean, we've got like fiery takedowns and personal stories and even some scientific data. This is going to be a wild one.
It really is a topic that gets people fired up, that's for sure.
For sure. And that's why we're doing this deep dive, right? We're here to figure out if this movement is actually helping or making things worse. Like, what's the deal?
Yeah, that's the big question. And to really understand that, we got to start with what the movement's all about. Like, what are they actually trying to do?
Right, because just saying fat acceptance, that can
Yeah.
sound kind of extreme to some people, maybe even offensive. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. The term itself can be loaded. But, this isn't some new fad. It actually goes back to the 60s, like, think civil rights era, protests, all that.
No, wow. So it's got some deep roots then.
Yeah, deep roots. Early groups like NEFA, the National Association to Advance Fat Acceptance, they were focused on fighting discrimination, like basic equality stuff.
So less about body positivity and more about just being treated fairly.
Exactly. It was about saying, hey, we deserve the same rights and opportunities as everyone else, no matter our size.
Makes sense.
And then over time, that evolved to include the whole health at every size thing, or HAES, which that's where things get a little more controversial.
Yeah, HAES. That's the one I always hear people debating about.
Right, because it challenges that traditional medical view that being overweight is automatically unhealthy. They're saying you can be healthy at any size, and focusing only on weight loss can actually be harmful mentally and physically.
I can see how that message would be appealing to people who've always felt pressured to fit into some, like, impossible standard.
For sure. That resonates with a lot of folks.
But some of the sources you sent, especially those pieces by Hunter Avalon and Paul Joseph Watson, they're not holding back. They are really going after HAES and the whole movement.
They are very critical, no doubt. Avalone, for example, he argues that the movement is basically ignoring all the health risks that come with obesity. He even calls HAEs pathetically stupid at one point.
Yeah, he does not mince words.
Mm.
He also brings up that statistic about obesity being a leading cause of preventable death, and then that really sad story about Lionel Shriver's brother.
Right. His brother, who struggled with obesity and died of a heart attack really young, it's a tragic reminder of what can happen.
It is. But I also know that just because two things happen together doesn't mean one caused the other, right? Like, obesity might increase the risk of certain problems, but it's not the only factor.
Definitely. It's complex. There's a lot more to it than just weight.
Right. And that's where the science gets all nuanced.
Yeah.
And speaking of nuance, Avalon also says the movement has a victim mentality.
Yeah, he talks about that a lot. He uses that example of the woman complaining about how hard it is to find bras in her size, but then in the same breath, she's criticizing thin people for having it easy.
Like she wants to have her cake and eat it too.
Kind of, yeah. He calls it the perks of taking care of your body. Like, maybe if you put in the effort, you wouldn't have those problems.
Interesting. And then there's that whole thin privilege thing. That's a hot button issue, for sure.
Oh, yeah. He goes off on that one. He sees it as this weird reversal of how we usually think about privilege. Like, now it's the thin people who are being discriminated against.
That's a whole other deep dive right there.
It really is, and we could unpack that for hours. But I think the main point here is that these criticisms are coming from a place of genuine concern. Like, these guys are worried about what normalizing obesity could lead to.
Yeah, I can see that. They're not just trying to be mean. They see it as a real problem.
Exactly. And it goes beyond health, too. Avalon also says the movement encourages people to be proud of things they shouldn't be proud of.
Like what? Can you give me an example?
He uses this image of a woman who's overweight, but she's proudly wearing a crop top and a mini skirt. His point is that loving your body doesn't mean staying the same. You can love yourself and still want to improve.
Makes you think, like, is true self-acceptance about just accepting where you are, or is it about striving to be healthier, even if that means changing?
Yeah, it's a tough question. Where do you draw the line? And it's not just Avalon who's critical. Paul Joseph Watson also has some strong opinions.
Oh, yeah. He's not shy about sharing his views, that's for sure.
Definitely not. And he sees this movement as part of a bigger feminist agenda, one that he says promotes victimhood and attacks successful women.
Okay, can you elaborate on that? I'm not sure I follow.
He uses that example of Maria Kang, remember her? The
Yeah.
fitness instructor who got slammed for posting a picture of herself looking fit after having kids.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. It was all over the news.
Well, Watson says that's just one example of how feminists try to tear down women who embrace traditional beauty standards.
So he's saying they're promoting an unhealthy lifestyle that's bad for women.
That's his argument, yeah.
Yeah.
And he links it back to obesity by saying, Feminists are basically pushing this idea that being overweight is okay, which he sees as harmful.
Wow, that's a pretty bold claim.
It is, and it's definitely something we need to look at more closely. But I think it highlights how this whole fat acceptance thing is tied up in all these other social and political issues, which makes it even more complicated.
Yeah, no kidding. So we've got these passionate arguments from both sides, these personal stories, and a whole lot of emotions flying around.
Lots of strong opinions.
But what about the cold, hard facts? Like, does this movement actually have any science to back up its claims?
That's where it gets really interesting. You gave us this study from 2020, right? It looked at how accepting larger body sizes affects people's perception of their own weight.
Okay, so what did they find?
Well, it seems like normalizing bigger bodies might actually make people less likely to realize they're gaining weight and therefore less likely to do anything about it.
Wait, so the message is backfiring. Like, by trying to make people feel better about their weight, they're actually making the problem worse.
That's what the study suggests, yeah. And it raises some serious questions like, if people don't even realize they're gaining weight, how can they address any health concerns that might come with it?
That's a really good point. So it's not as simple as just saying, love yourself no matter what.
Not at all. This is a complex issue with potential downsides, even if the intentions are good. It makes you think about that balance between acceptance and personal responsibility.
Right, it's not black and white. So what's the takeaway for our listeners here? We've got strong opinions, emotional stories, and now some science that adds another layer of complexity. Where do we go from here?
I think it means this whole conversation is way more than just slogans and easy answers. It's about body image, health, societal pressures, all these deeply personal things. And maybe, just maybe, the key is to start asking better questions instead of clinging to rigid ideologies.
Okay, I like that. So instead of trying to decide who's right and who's wrong, let's dig into those deeper questions.
Exactly. Let's move past the anger and the blame and see if we can find some common ground, some understanding. Let's talk about that fat salon example.
Yeah?
It's this like exclusive space, right? Just for plus size women.
Okay.
And they've got everything like reinforced chairs, cake. They even go to a club afterward.
Oh, wow. Cake at a salon? That's a new one.
Right. But it seems kind of ironic, doesn't it? A movement that's all about fighting against expectations is creating its own little bubble.
Yeah, like aren't they just reinforcing the stereotypes they're trying to break down?
That's exactly Watson's point. He says it's like this echo chamber where those stereotypes just get amplified instead of challenged.
Interesting. And he also compares it to addiction, right?
Yeah, he talks about how it might appeal to those cravings for love and acceptance, but maybe in a way that exploits people's insecurities rather than truly helping them love themselves.
So it's like, are they creating a safe space or are they enabling unhealthy behaviors?
It's a tough question, like, where's the line? Maybe the intentions are good, but the results could be kind of messed up.
It's like that whole debate about tough love versus just letting people do whatever they want.
Exactly. And then you've got that Avengers Endgame thing. Talk about a sensitive topic.
Oh man, that whole Thor thing.
Right. So Thor gains weight in the movie, and some people in the fat acceptance movement were outraged.
Really? I mean, come on, it's a superhero movie. People are reading way too much into this.
Well, some folks felt like it was making fun of overweight people. There were even calls for trigger warnings.
Trigger warnings for a Marvel movie. Seriously.
Yeah, it got pretty intense. There's this article from The Guardian where the author talks about how hurtful it was to hear people laughing at Thor.
Okay, I get that. Humor can be subjective. What's funny to one person might be offensive to another.
Right, and for some people, it brought up those painful memories of being body shamed.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. That same article also praises Marvel for not having that typical workout montage where Thor gets back in shape.
Yeah, it's kind of weird they criticize the movie for being fat phobic, but then praise it for not showing Thor losing weight.
So are they saying exercise is bad? I'm so confused.
I don't think it's that simple. I think they're trying to say that your worth shouldn't be tied to how you look, that you can be happy and accepted even if you don't change your body.
Okay, I can see that. But then Paul Joseph Watson comes in with a totally different take. He says skipping the workout scene actually sends a bad message.
Yeah, he thinks it's promoting this idea that it's okay to just stay the same, that you don't need to improve yourself.
Interesting. So we've got these passionate arguments, these real-life examples that show how messy things can get, and a whole lot of emotions flying around.
Yeah, a lot of passion on both sides.
But where's the science in all of this? Does the fat acceptance movement have any actual evidence to back up what they're saying?
Now that's where things get really interesting. Remember that 2020 study we talked about? The one about plus size acceptance and how people perceive their weight?
Yeah, yeah. Remind me what they found.
Well, it turns out that normalizing bigger bodies might actually make it harder for people to recognize when they're gaining weight.
Oh, wow. So they're less likely to even realize there's a problem, let alone do anything about it.
Exactly. And that could have some serious consequences, right? Like, if you don't know you're gaining weight, you might not address any health issues that come with it.
That's a really good point. So even with good intentions, this movement might be unintentionally making things worse.
That's what the study suggests, yeah.
Hmm.
And it really highlights how complex this whole thing is. It's not just about feeling good about yourself, it's about personal responsibility and understanding the link between weight and health.
Right. It's not black and white at all. So
Mm.
we've got all these strong opinions, these emotional stories, and now some scientific data that throws another wrench in the works. What does this all mean for our listeners? What's the takeaway?
Well, I think it means this whole conversation is way bigger than just slogans and easy answers. It's about body image, health, societal pressures. It's about all these deeply personal things.
And maybe instead of trying to figure out who's right and who's wrong, we need to start asking ourselves some tougher questions.
Exactly. Let's try to get past all the anger and the blame and see if we can find some common ground, some understanding.
Okay, so we've heard all these different sides, all these passionate arguments. It's clear this fat acceptance thing is, uh, it's complicated. There's no easy answer.
It really is, yeah. And maybe that's okay, you know? Maybe the first step isn't finding the perfect solution. Maybe it's about learning to ask the right questions.
I like that. So what kind of questions should we be asking ourselves when we're trying to wrap our heads around all of this?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is, can we be honest about the health risks without like shaming people? Can we promote body positivity and self-love, but also encourage people to take care of themselves?
It's like finding that balance between acceptance and responsibility.
Right, exactly. And maybe that balance looks different for everyone. Maybe there isn't a one-size-fits-all answer here. But what if the goal was to create a world where people feel empowered to make their own choices about their bodies and their health?
And that means having those honest conversations about weight and health, right? We can't just ignore the science, but we also can't treat people like numbers on a scale.
That's it. It's about recognizing that health is more than just your weight. It's physical, it's mental, it's emotional, it's all connected.
So instead of asking, how can I lose weight? Maybe we should be asking, how can I take better care of myself? How can I feel good in my own skin? How can I live a healthy and fulfilling life?
Those are the questions we should be asking, yeah. And maybe the answers will lead us to a place where body positivity and personal responsibility can actually work together.
And where we can have these tough conversations without all the anger and judgment, even when we disagree.
Exactly. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about winning an argument. It's about building a world where everyone feels valued and supported no matter what they look like.
That's a great goal to strive for.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the most important thing is to really think critically about the messages you're getting from the media, from the fat acceptance movement, from everywhere. Don't just blindly accept what you hear, question it. Look at the evidence, form your own opinions.
So be an active participant in the conversation, not just a passive listener.
Exactly. And remember, your worth isn't tied to your size. You're valuable and deserving of respect no matter what.
That's a message we can all get behind. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the fat acceptance movement. We hope it's given you some food for thought.
Yeah, and encourage you to keep exploring these important issues, keep asking those tough questions, and keep digging deeper.
Until next time.